I ended up winning a poker tournament for $50,000 at 18 years old. I don't think I had an addiction from the beginning. I think it definitely was a progression and it took time to develop. At 23 years old, I ended up winning another poker tournament, this time for over six figures. Those $5 games with my friends were no longer good enough. I had to up the stakes, and now it's $500 games and $1,000 bets. I'm gambling during my fire shift, in the back of an ambulance with a patient. By this time, I had lost every single dollar that I won in less than a year. So almost $500,000 in less than a year. I can't stop when I'm winning, and I can't stop when I'm losing.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the One Day at a Time podcast. Today's guest is Greg. He's a full-time fireman, and he's also a program facilitator at Epic Global Solutions, a group that seeks to educate people on the risks of gambling harm. Greg, how are we doing today?
Doing really good, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Of course, man. For those that are just seeing you for the first time, how about we set the scene here? You're in recovery from a gambling disorder, and how long has it been since your last bet?
Yeah, so I entered recovery for gambling addiction in February of 2020. So about 4 years, going on 4 years now. And I gambled from 13 to 30 years old. So probably about 17 years of gambling mixed in there.
And I think a good place to start might be, do you remember the first time you ever placed a bet?
I actually do. Yeah. So my friends and I used to be outside all the time, and I was playing Manhunt, which is like a hide and seek type game. And I remember being finished with that, and one of my friends asked if I wanted to come in and play a poker game. I had to borrow $5 from my parents, ran right over to my friend's house, and that was kind of my introduction to gambling back when I was about 13 years old. And it was kind of weird timing because right around that time, a guy by the name of Chris Moneymaker, it's kind of a familiar story in gambling circles, especially with people around my age. He was just a run of the mill everyday guy. He was an accountant, and he was on ESPN playing poker against a bunch of professionals. And he actually won the World Series of Poker for over $1 million. So that was kind of my introduction to gambling, and it kind of took me in right away.
It's interesting because it is a common pattern that I've heard other people say that was one of the focal points of their developing a gambling problem. Do you think that today we're seeing the same thing kind of play out with online slot influencers? How people are like, this guy is winning, so I should go and do it too?
Yeah, I kind of talk about it all the time when I talk to student athletes now about the glamorization of gambling, right? There's all these streams, and you're kind of only seeing the positives. Like you're seeing the big wins, you're seeing ads and risk-free bets and all of this, like these slogans that are more, on the good side of it. And you don't really get to see the negatives and what it can do to somebody that actually develops an addiction with gambling.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And it's why I talk about it so much in my content, is this mass normalization of gambling is what I like to call it. When you were at that poker game, you're 13 years old, you're borrowing $5 to make that first bet. What kind of emotions are you feeling? Are you embodying Chris Moneymaker at the time? Are you pretending to be him? Like, what does it feel like?
Yeah, I always played sports growing up, so I was an athlete. I was really competitive, and this had like all the makings of what I loved about sport. There was a competition to it. I'm playing against other people. There's something on the line, so there's a risk reward, and it was a feeling that I've never really experienced in my life. Like I was compared to like playing in a championship type of game. Like that's the dopamine rush that I felt even that first time. Like it was just like nothing I ever experienced. And, I was kind of chasing that feeling ever since that first day.
On that first day, you're doing it with friends, you're enjoying it preferably, or I imagine that you're talking a lot during the process. So it's like a community type event. When did the gambling start to change from that to something else?
Yeah, so I always say I don't think I had an addiction from the beginning. I think it definitely was a progression and it took time to develop. When I was 18 years old, before heading off to Rutgers, where I went to college, I was playing online poker in New Jersey. It wasn't legal yet here in the US, but I ended up winning a poker tournament for $50,000 at 18 years old. And when I talk to people in recovery groups now, a lot of them have a positive first experience with gambling. And I think I got that maybe times 10 because this was money that I had no idea what to do with, and it was like such a big win that it kind of changed everything for me, and it gave me this idea that I could do this. Like I can make a career out of this, or at least do it part time and make money doing so. So that was kind of the spark for my gambling, and then after that, it was kind of all about chasing that high of that big win. And I just wanted to do that over and over again and prove to myself that it wasn't kind of like a fluke.
How much did the money play a role in your motivation to continue? Because when you say it like that, it sounds more like you're trying to prove your skill rather than chasing after another win.
It definitely was a lot about just trying to win and the competition aspect of it, but I really enjoyed having money and
Mm,
being known as the successful poker player or the gambler.
mm,
I think money definitely played a big role in it where I wanted to have nice things. I wanted to gamble for higher and higher stakes. I kind of saw it in the beginning as a means to an end where, hey, if I can make enough money doing this, I could, live a glamorous, successful lifestyle.
mm.
It didn't turn out that way, but that's kind of my thoughts on it early on.
Sure. I think that's a common pattern as well. I felt the same way. And I used it to an extent to kind of define who I was. Like you just said, you wanted to be known as the gambler, the poker player, the guy who could win. I felt the same way with sports. Like, oh, the guy that knows sports so well, or he knows how to pick. I think that's probably something a lot of people listening can relate to. As this is progressing, you go off to school. Does it get worse once you leave home and once you're in kind of an unfamiliar surrounding?
Yeah, so that freedom kind of provided me with the opportunity to do whatever I wanted, and what I wanted to do most of the time was gamble. During this time, it was becoming a higher and higher priority in my life. I'd choose it over a night out with my friends drinking or an intramural basketball game. I lost my identity as an athlete after high school. I stopped playing sports, competitively, but I still played from time to time. And now my entire identity was based around being a gambler, a poker player, a sports bettor.
Mhm,
It was gambling was the number one priority during this time, and I was able to graduate in 4 years. Like, it didn't have a huge impact on my time at Rutgers. I graduated with a decent GPA. Probably could have done a lot better if I was focusing on school and not gambling. But it was the most important thing in my life, and it was becoming more and more important. And soon after college, New Jersey was one of the first states to legalize online poker and online gaming in 2013. So this was really the highlight of the next 10 years of my gambling, because now I could do it and I didn't have to go on these sites that were unregulated. It was legal to do here in New
mhm,
Jersey, and it was also an hour drive for me down to Atlantic City or to Parks Casino in Pennsylvania. Like, all of these things were right at my disposal,
mhm.
and that's when it kind of really hit the fan in my early 20s.
I hear poker players talk a lot about variance. And you go and there's times that you do everything right in the game and you still lose money. What would you tell yourself during the times that you were losing? Because I imagine that over the 4 years in college and the years following, there were times where you were up, times where you were down. What motivated you to continue even after experiencing losses or negatives?
Yeah, so the tricky thing about gambling is there are rewards and you do win from time to time, right? It's not like alcohol or drugs where it's just going to constantly be a negative
Mm,
impact on your life. So at 23 years old, I ended up winning another poker tournament, this time for over six figures, which
mhm,
was triple what I was making as a firefighter in my first year on the job. So this kind of warped my entire view on money, right?
mhm,
So this was a 2-day tournament in Atlantic City, and I made triple my salary in 2 days. So those $5 games with my friends were no longer good enough. I had to up the stakes, and now it's $500 games and thousand
mhm,
dollar bets. So it was very easy for me to talk myself into playing higher and gambling for more and more. And like
mhm,
you said, I had success from time to time, so it was pretty easy to tell myself, hey, if I have a losing week or even a losing month, I have proven to myself that I could do this. And looking back now, I obsessed over trying to control my gambling because
mhm,
I was always able to convince myself, hey, this is just variance. Like, you're playing well, but things maybe aren't going your way. But
mhm,
the truth of the matter was, I was going on tilt constantly, which in poker means kind of throwing all strategy out the window and chasing your losses. And this is something that I couldn't control. I remember having a notebook. I was trying to write down how long I was playing each day and how much
mhm,
money I was spending. Um, no matter what happened, I would always kind of throw all the strategy out the window because I would lose as a 90% favorite in a poker hand, or
mhm,
I'd have a bet in a game. Somebody would hit a half court shot in the basketball game at the buzzer, and I'd lose that bet. And being somebody that's always been competitive and hates to lose, I chase my losses and I need to get that money back as fast as I could.
mhm.
And as you know, that leads to big time problems when it comes to gambling.
Oh, 100%. And I want to get into some of those problems and get kind of to the peak of things. But before we do that, a lot of times I'll get questions to the extent of like, "Hey, I know I'm a problem gambler. Can I still play poker?" And I think this is an interesting opportunity to phrase this question. Did you view your poker differently than you viewed sports betting or casino games? And if so, why?
It's a great question. I kind of put it into two categories: skill based forms of gambling, which I do think sports betting, there is a skill to it, right? If you do a bunch of research, if you know a lot about sports, I felt like sports betting and poker to me were the ones that I could have success with if I put in the work and I was able to have control over it, right? Um, Other forms of gambling, like my grandmother, for instance, would take the bus to Atlantic City
Mm,
once a month, and she'd sit at the slots and just press that button for 5 hours straight. And I remember telling her, like, Grandma, you can't do that. You're just going to lose your money. But she never had a problem with it, right? She
mm,
just did it with her friends. It was fun for her, and she, lost her $20 or whatever it was, and it was fine. But for me, I moved over into those other games, right? Soon I'm playing online blackjack, I'm playing online roulette, and I couldn't walk past the a craps table or a roulette table when I was in Atlantic City leaving the poker room on my way back to my room. Like I had to stop and
mm,
gamble. And that's when I knew I was kind of starting to have a problem, was when I moved to all those other forms of gambling. Like it just wasn't good enough sticking to those two forms of gambling.
mm,
And even with the poker and sports betting, I wasn't doing them in the way that I could have success, right? Because I'm staying up and I'm betting on the 12 o'clock Hawaii game because I'm chasing my losses and I have no idea about anything to do with Hawaii football,
mm.
right? So it just became a cycle of, you know, trying to stick to a plan and then throwing that out the window and kind of chasing losses and diving into all these different forms of gambling.
Mm. I want to push you further on that point. Can a problem gambler profit sports betting? And can a problem gambler profit playing poker in the long run?
It depends on how you define problem gambler. So if it's somebody like me with a gambling addiction, right, which
Mhm,
I guess that's what your question is, I would definitely say no, because I know that I can't win in gambling because I can't stop when I'm winning and I can't stop when I'm losing, right?
mm,
There's never an amount that's enough for me. And when I'm losing, I need to get it all back. And that always runs to zero. I could do it and have success for multiple days in a row, but soon enough, something's going to happen where I'm going to lose all control and I'm not going to be able to stop, right? So you have to exercise, bankroll management, and you have to stick to your strategy and plan. And for somebody with a gambling addiction, I just don't think that's possible when it comes to
mm.
even sports betting and poker.
I appreciate that. A lot of the pushback that I get online when I make blanket statements is you're a loser because you couldn't figure out how to do bankroll management. You're a loser because you didn't do enough research. It's my belief that you can further segment sports betting versus poker. I don't have a firm argument on why you'll lose money in poker over the long run, but I do on sports betting. And it's because you cannot accurately predict all of the different variables that go into a sport. There's too many different things going on. There's too many wheels at play. But when it comes to poker, I do always hesitate on that answer. And it's like, why can't you play poker? And it's because we can't stop. So I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, to your point, I can almost say this with the fact that there's way more people that have success and can successfully be a professional poker player and do it, as a career than on the other hand with sports betting. I know there's very, very few people that are going to have long-term success and hit that, whatever it is, 55% of bets that you need to hit to be successful.
Mm,
So poker is a tricky one, and it's something that I've had to really wrap my head around and try
mm,
to figure out, how do I deal with this when I have had success and I've shown that I can do it, but bankroll management and responsible gambling, like those don't exist for me, right? So
mm.
I can't do this in the long term. But it took me, quite some time to come to that realization, unfortunately.
And I appreciate the honesty because that's how I feel about options trading. That's
Hmm.
the exact way. It's like, why do I have to lose? Show me why statistically I have to lose. And it's really tough, but eventually you get there. But, anyways, getting back into your personal timeline, we're at this point now where you're having some wins, you're having losses. The gambling's beginning to progress. You're finding yourself going into other forms of gambling besides poker. When does it get to be, we'll call it rock bottom? You don't have to call it that, but when does it really hit its kind of peak in terms of the frequency of gambling?
Yeah. So right around 2017, I had lost the majority of the money that I won in that poker tournament 3 years prior or 4 years prior. So six figures in almost 4 years, that's a lot of money to lose. But in my mind, all it takes is one more tournament or, one more winning week betting sports. And everything actually worked out for me this time. I entered a poker tournament in Atlantic City again at the Borgata. And 4 or 5 days later, I end up at the final table of six people where I'm guaranteed over six figures and I'm playing for $800,000 for first place. And it was the biggest rush I've ever felt in my life. I know I'll never experience like my heart literally beating out of my chest. My parents were there. My girlfriend, who I just started dating, was there. It was going to be televised. And I ended up coming in second place for $471,000 in 2017. I wanted to go to Vegas and win millions of dollars, but for a 27-year-old, this was pretty damn good at the time. And I remember, going up to my mom afterwards, and she was kind of having tears in her eyes, and she was like, "You're set. Like you've kind of set yourself up for the future now with this amount of money that you won." And the reason she was getting emotional about this was a few months prior, we got the unfortunate news that my mom had pancreatic cancer.
Mm.
So if you're not familiar with pancreatic cancer, it's one of kind of the worst forms to get if you don't kind of catch it early. And we were just in shock. And she actually worked in an oncology unit where she treated patients for cancer. So, complete shock to all of us. And especially to me, I think, because I was a big mama's boy. Like I talked to her about literally everything. She was the closest person to me in my life. And winning this money, when I won this money, was probably the worst time I could have won it, because the way I kind of dealt with my mom being sick was just by not dealing with it at all.
Mm.
I just escaped through gambling, and now I kind of had the money to do that. So I'm playing the highest stakes I possibly can every single day, on these New Jersey sites, gambling, way outside of what I should be doing. And by the next year, in May of 2018, I get another phone call from my dad that my mom called a hospice nurse. And I'm in complete shock. I rush home, and I spent the next week with my mom before she passed away, May 26, 2018. And by this time, I had lost every single dollar that I won from that poker tournament in less than a year. So almost $500,000 in less than a year. Like you would think this would be the end of the story. Lost everything. Worst time of my life by far. But I never viewed gambling as a real addiction. I thought, hey, I'll just kind of stop on my own now and go forward with my future. I had a cousin that passed away recently to a heroin overdose, and to me, that was a real addiction, right?
Mm.
I always had DARE growing up, which is drugs and alcohol in schools. I'm sure you probably did too. Never had anything with gambling at all.
Mm.
And for the next, couple of months, I was able to stop on my own, just white knuckle it. I'm just going to do this on my own. And then things got better, and I got complacent, and I never went and got help. I just trying to do it on my own. So it was easy to convince myself that it's going to be different this next time. And move in with my girlfriend for the next 2 years, I kind of gambled and lied and hid my gambling until 2020. And that's kind of when I had to come clean.
Mm. During the time that you were hiding it, what kind of emotions did that invoke? Did it feel like it was getting even worse because it was happening behind the scenes?
It was really hard because I had nobody to talk to and I had nowhere to go. I was completely in my own shell, and
Mm.
I'm gambling during my fire shift, in the back of an ambulance with a patient, like literally on my phone gambling. I'm staying up all night during work. I'm sitting in the bathroom when my girlfriend's home for 20 minutes at a time, just playing when I can on my phone. And it was kind of easy to hide it because the access is crazy these days, right? You can do it. I could sit on my couch next to my girlfriend, across from her, and she had no idea that I was doing it. And it was very lonely. It was actually exhausting, and my mental health was, pretty much deteriorating without me even thinking about it. My physical health also, like not being active, just taking every minute that I can to gamble when it allowed me to. And hiding your gambling or hiding my gambling kind of just became something that I did and I became good at over those next 2 years. The only reason that I did stop was because I ran out of access to money.
Mm.
By the time 2020 rolled around, I had taken out 7 personal loans. I maxed out all of my credit cards. I couldn't borrow another dollar to gamble with. And it's insane to me looking back that it got to that point. Because if you asked me in the beginning, would you ever borrow a dollar or borrow any money to gamble with? And I would say, no chance. Like, that's crazy. But I got to the point where that's I ran out of access and I had to come clean to my girlfriend. She was kind of expecting for me to propose at the time. And she was probably thinking that, hey, maybe I'm not ready to commit, but I had all these loans that she had no idea about. And I had to go home to my dad as a 30-year-old man and cry in his arms and tell him about what happened. And I was fortunate enough through my work union to go to my first Gamblers Anonymous meeting that night in February of 2020.
It's so polarizing when you look at it in its full picture that just a few years prior, you were gambling on TV, and now you're hiding the gambling from the person that you're closest to. It can happen incredibly quickly, and it can happen to anyone. With that first Gamblers Anonymous meeting, what did you feel walking into there?
It was a complete like shock to the system that there's 25 other people in the world that have this same problem that I have. It was also like, okay, I can finally actually admit to myself like this is a thing. Like this
Mhm.
is really something that I need to actually get help with, and I can't just solve it on my own. I remember they did the 20 questions, which is for those that aren't familiar, they kind of gives you a good picture on if you have a problem with gambling. And I answered yes to 18 out of 20. So it was pretty obvious that I was in the right place. I remember crying when I was in that meeting and also sitting in my car, kind of petrified to go in the first place. But it was something that I really needed to do because it was the first moment that I realized, okay, like you need help and help is available, which is something that I just can never can really wrap my head around before that.
That's amazing, and I can relate to the first experience. I had a very, very similar shock to the system, answering yes to 19 of the 20 questions. Following that, how did things begin to progress in your life? Was it a straightforward path to feeling better, or were there ups and downs along the way?
And I always kind of tell people that are new to recovery now that just because you stop gambling doesn't mean life is easy.
Right.
I thought it was just going to be easy button, like okay, I stopped gambling, I'm going to sort everything out. In a sense, it was kind of harder actually because I didn't have my way to escape anymore,
Mhm.
and I would say like I felt like I lost so much time on on kind of learning how to deal with life and like face real problems and just um, yeah. So it hasn't been super easy, I don't think at all, and I've had to really kind of take a hard look at myself. Like I've done some step work. I meet with your last guest, Jeff Wasserman is my mentor, and I speak with him every single week. So he's been like the biggest person that's been there for me week in and week out. I kind of owe him the world in my recovery and his group as well. Like it's amazing that I'm able to do these meetings now with Jeff's group, and I can do it from home, and I don't have to kind of travel and go to GA. So it's been amazing. I did have a slip up 2 years ago, right around my wedding, where I gambled, and my girlfriend, who I've talked about in this story, kind of stuck with me through everything. She's you know much better person than I think I could have been if the situations were reversed. She's amazing, and I love her for sticking with me. I gambled the week before our wedding, and she found out about it when we were on our honeymoon. So I had to kind of reevaluate everything as far as my recovery is concerned, and I needed to add kind of more accountability in my life. Like just meetings kind of wasn't enough, and I have been really fortunate to find Epic Global Solutions, which is kind of my side job now. But I don't really look at it as a side job. It doesn't even feel like work to me, actually. I do stuff like this, and I travel and I talk to student athletes, and I give them a presentation about gambling education and awareness,
Mhm.
which is kind of something that I think has been lacking, in the U.S. and kind of everywhere. And the cool thing about Epic is we use our lived experience and we tell our story, during the first half of our presentation, and it's really cool to see their kind of interest kind of peak and their eyes kind of get wide open, and they're like, wow, like there's a human element to this, and this person who was an athlete like myself, and kind of I can see myself being him in the future, and
Mhm.
he's just a normal guy, and he went through this much gambling harm, right? So if they're able to put that kind of face to it, it's just really rewarding, I think, for me. And selfishly, I do it, like I said, for myself
Yeah.
because it keeps me accountable. I can't show up to these rooms or come and speak to you about gambling addiction if I'm not putting in the work and kind of staying away from it. Cheesy to say, but I would say if we can touch one person in every room and have an impact, like that is doing a great job, I think.
It's using negative experiences to create some kind of positive in your life. Do you remember what, kind of triggered you back into the slip, and then kind of what you did to reestablish that accountability?
Yeah, I think I've come to learn that like stressful situations, and my wedding was an amazing time in my life, but there's a lot that goes into it, right? And money is a big one, right? So I know money is a trigger for me when we have to spend a lot and, we're having issues paying for the wedding. And now I'm thinking, wow, I probably caused so much of these issues. It could have been so much easier if I hadn't did all of that when I gambled. And for some reason, I'm able to convince myself that gambling more is going to solve the problem, which is
Mhm.
what I thought throughout my gambling, right? With drugs and alcohol, doing more of either is never going to solve your problem. But for me, gambling was always going to get me out of my gambling addiction. It's not true, right? It's never going to solve it, but that's kind of how I viewed it. And I went back and I did it for a week, and it got just as bad, just as quickly as it always did, right? I convinced myself yet again that I could do it, and I proved otherwise that I really couldn't. I see a lot of members come into our recovery group now talking about their relapse, and it's amazing that people are able to come back after that because it is pretty shameful. Like you feel like you've you know gambling's beaten you again. And for me, I had to have really tough conversations, with Jeff and with people I trusted about, okay, like it's great that you're back in the group and you're working on yourself again, but how do we stop this from happening again?
Mhm.
And what can we actually implement in a real way that's going to stop you from doing this? And thank God that I found Epic and do the work I do now because I needed that extra layer of accountability, like you said, because without it, I don't know if I'd be able to maintain my recovery.
With that being said, something else that's probably not so easy is repaying debts following gambling. Do you remember your strategy for debt repayment? And if so, would you recommend that strategy to someone else?
Man, I remember that first week when I stopped gambling, the only thing I could think about was like, what do I do? Like, how do I have all of these loans? I can't afford to pay them. I remember going to a bankruptcy attorney. I remember going to a debt consolidation company, like kind of just on the phone all day, trying to find all the options that I could find. It could just really weigh on you, and it's super stressful. And I was really fortunate to have my grandfather kind of consolidate my debt for me, where he kind of gave me a lump sum and I paid off all of those like 14% interest rate loans that I just took out. I didn't even look at the rates, obviously, because I just needed the money at the time. And I set up a plan with him where I would pay him back at like a very small rate. My grandparents have been there for me, and they've bailed me out time to time, which I don't know if that was the best thing they could have done. But they love me, and like I'm so grateful for them that he was able to do that for me. And
Mhm.
now I could make these payments, and they were still big payments, but it just got so much easier with time, and he made the situation a lot easier on me. But yeah, the money situation and the debt can just kind of overwhelm you, I think, once you're into recovery.
Yeah, I think a key takeaway from that is even if you don't have the option of having someone consolidate your debt, to check all your options and come up with some type of plan ahead of time. Because when you're consistently scrambling and you're trying to make ends meet, paying off debts that you forgot about and they came up out of nowhere, XYZ things happening, you might turn to gambling as a quick fix. And so it's important to get that clarity ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I actually had to list out all of my loans and like literally every single dollar that comes in and out, right? And
Mm,
I think that was huge to do. It really hurt to do, to like actually take a look at all the damage I had done. But I think, like you said, that's super beneficial because how can you even know where to start, unless you kind of lay everything out, have somebody there with you, like my wife or my girlfriend at the time. We
mm.
looked at it all, and I had to try to find what the best option was. And I think that's like the best route to kind of figure it all out.
One thing that I wanted to circle back to that we touched on in the beginning. So you work as a firefighter now, right?
Yep.
Do you feel like you were drawn to a profession that involved risk taking, and did that play any kind of factor in the gambling experience?
That's an awesome question. Yes, I think I just enjoy the rush, like with everything in life. Like I love roller coasters. I love anything that gives me that thrill. I'm
Mhm,
always looking for that kind of, and firefighting kind of gives that to me. To the 10th degree, I guess. Running into a burning building when we do have a fire is exhilarating and exciting, and it's definitely a profession where I think a lot of people are more at risk to have problems with gambling just because of the
mm,
thrill seeking nature of it. And I actually am we're kind of starting a pilot with Epic. I spoke to first responders and firefighters in September, and this was the first time I shared my story with that demographic. I was actually really nervous talking to those guys. Like, if a lot of them do know about my gambling addiction, but they never heard the whole story. And we're trying to expand this and talk to all first responders because I think this is a population. There could be a lot of harm that's being done, but it's not spoken about because there still is that kind of culture of it's very team oriented, right? It's similar to a sports team, and we're trying to kind of break into that, and hopefully, we're going to be able to do that, and I can maybe do this in the future more often, where I, go to firehouses or go to police stations and talk to them because I think it's super important. And the survey that we gave out during that speaking, it showed really really high levels of concern for that demographic. So yeah, it's really cool now. I think that I'm going to be able to kind of pursue that avenue as well as the sports avenue because it's something that I'm definitely passionate about with helping people that might need it.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's kind of anecdotal, but I live in Philadelphia, and there was one time I was over at my girlfriend's house, and the fire alarm went, and we were all standing outside the building, and the fire truck came up. The crew went in, they checked the building, they came out. There was no real fire; it was just a false alarm. A guy comes out, and he's holding like the fire axe that I guess you guys have, and he walks out and he looks at me and he locks eyes with me, points the fire axe at me, and he goes, "I know you," and I'm like, "Hey." So he was like, "Hey, thanks for checking the building." But I'm like, people don't recognize me unless they watch this kind of content. And so anecdotally, I think maybe it is a demographic that needs some more attention. Same with like military. It's always confused me how active duty military bases have so many godforsaken slot machines, but but they do. And I had no idea about it until I talked to Dave Yeager about it.
Yeah, I know Dave, and like the work he's doing is amazing because that's definitely an area where, again, it's like that culture of like I'm gonna fix it on my own, and it's just like a very kind of outdated culture in a sense where it's like nobody's vulnerable and talking about their problems like within the military or at the firehouse, right? You're not gonna kind of open up and get like sentimental and have like these
Yeah.
types of conversations. Like it's just not really a thing. Hopefully, it is in the future, though, right? Because if we're able to kind of break down those barriers and kind of get in there, I think it could do a lot of good. Just because having those real conversations, can make a huge difference. I've talked to people that I had no idea that they were going through something, but just because they've heard, my story, that they're able to open up and kind of tell me about what's going on in their lives. So, yeah, just doing this type of stuff, I think, is just so impactful, even though you might not see it.
How do you implement change in a group like that when that group might view a lot of the practices as almost corny or like, "Hey, like, why am I gonna talk about my feelings, man? Like, just help me fix this," kinda thing. How do you implement change?
Yeah, it's hard, but I think it's just like taking that first step. Like I thought going and speaking at that convention in front of, two or 300 firemen, I got a lot of good feedback from it actually. And I didn't get any really negative feedback at all about like, hey, this is kind of like a weak thing. Like, how could you be doing this and talking about your problems? So I think all it takes is one or two people to kind of step up and like be that change, right? And it's my my role and how I am at work is like night and day. After I stopped gambling, I was always very withdrawn, always to myself, never had a real conversation. Now I kind of know about everybody, like how their families are, who their families are, like real life stuff. And I think just being present and having those conversations just goes a long way. And it just takes time to kind of break down those barriers, I think.
Yeah, it kinda speaks to how have your priorities changed before or rather during your gambling and now after?
Wow. So I have a 2-year-old son. He just turned 2 in August, and I have a lot of responsibilities now. Like I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I have two jobs, and I'm just trying to do my best in all of those areas. And just being present for all of that. Like I'm super grateful that my son wasn't around when I was going through all of my gambling. And that's kind of a motivator for me where I don't want him to ever have to see me where how I was in that state. So my priorities are, my health, the health of my family, just providing for them and just being a good person, right? And just trying to make a little bit of an impact while I do it. And it's definitely a big change from being somebody that was super selfish during my gambling. I think gambling just inherently makes you a selfish person because all you're really caring about is your gambling, number one, and you don't really take into consideration the harm you're doing to others. So I think, my priorities have changed from it all being about me to now it being about my family, and I think that's one of the biggest benefits to my recovery for sure.
If you enjoyed this video and you want to hear another story about someone in recovery from a gambling addiction, then check out this video of Jeff W., who we were talking about a little bit earlier on. Greg, thank you so much for being on, and let's keep getting better together, one day at a time.